I have a joke going on with my partner Gopi, who's here, as to the amount of smile you have after my talk, how less it goes. So let's see. Please be gentle. So I have been in this business of innovation for more than 10 years now, and mostly in US. And for me, personally, innovation has never been about a process. It's not about a thing. It's not about being totally new. It's mostly has been more about a mindset. And we talked about mindset right in the beginning of the talk, and I kind of subscribe to that form. Innovation is more of a mindset, and it's really a mindset for problem solving. Now, Indian mindset is very Indian. It's very quirky. We have this extreme definition of value. Bargaining is in our blood, seriously. We love to cut corners. We are master copiers. There are many things here that are kind of counter to the traditional definitions of creativity. But but it is basically born out of our context. If you look at our context, it's extreme. We are many people, very few resources, and we are changing at a very fast and a rapid pace. I call it fast and furious. In fact, it is so fast and furious that you shouldn't even try to predict the future. Future prediction is a futile exercise. So how does one innovate in this situation? You actually need to be pretty grounded in the present. And to actually, in fact, you have to control the present to be even viable in the future. So what I have had the privilege, I've been living in US for 13 years, and now I'm back for 6 months, and it's only been 6 months. So before I stop noticing things, I have this privilege of being an insider and outsider at the same time. So what I want to share with you today are some of the patterns that I have seen where Indians are defining the rules of engagement, how they do innovation, pure Indian style. So first thing I want to talk about is copying. Copying is a very creative exercise here. So if you think about invention, or just the concept of invention, it's a very Western concept. I'm the first one to do this. I'm the only one to do this. Do you really think those things are relevant in India? They're definitely not relevant in our context. What is relevant in our context is, are you creating an opportunity? Are you making change? Outcome is what is important. And how you get there, the process, is almost irrelevant. So in that context, copying becomes a very legitimate way of innovating. Now, there are many forms to it. One can be talking about absolutely blatant copying, and a very good example of it is this Apple store in China, where it has been copied to the T that the employees working there did not even know that they were not working for Apple. And this is an example that is pretty well talked about. Or there is just blind copying. I call piracy in India blind copying. But if one can move beyond some of these blatant copying or blind copying into what I call inspired copying, then you have these great examples, very powerful examples of change. Like Arvind, they talk about being inspired by the standardization processes of McDonald's. We have NH, which is inspired by the efficiency of Walmart. And then we have these concepts of a corner coffee shop or a low-cost airline. Now, Indigo is not a new concept. CCD, Cafe Coffee Day, is not a new concept, but it works. It works in India because it's the Indian version of those concepts. Another thing that works very well here is good enough. As a designer, it actually pains me to say that, because we are kind of craftspeople. We take pride in what we do. But seriously, the world is not about us. Good enough works here. And what I mean by that is, like, our market is not consolidated. Competition is high. And in that context, companies are actually very quickly coming in and putting solutions in the white spaces of the market. Sometimes it's a new solution. Sometimes it's a low-cost version of an old solution. But most of these solutions are designed at 90%, because designing at 90% works here. 10% is mostly a luxury. In that 90%, what becomes very important is to balance the tension, and the tension is between three very important things. What is minimal, what is viable, and what is good. And if you can balance the minimum viable and good, then you can actually create something very powerful. So a very inspiring example is Jaipur Foot. I mean, they provide artificial limbs and rehab services for people who go to their particular center in Jaipur, and once you reach there, you are pretty much guaranteed a limb, regardless of your ability to pay. What they have designed is this very homegrown limb, which doesn't have the bells and whistles of all the prosthetics that the world has, but it is good enough. It is a solution that works for markets here. Another very good example is our internet providers. They are sitting on top of a very creaky infrastructure of India. So what they are able to provide us is creaky infrastructure. I mean, I have literally 2 connections at home, so that one, when it dies, there is another one, because life, it's like oxygen at this point. But at least they are providing us with that opportunity, and it works. Someone like me coming from US who likes to have good wine, I actually seriously cannot afford wine here. Good wine is very expensive because of all the import duties that are levied on it. But there comes Sula. I'm actually trying very hard to like it, but it works. It is good enough. So good enough seriously works here. Another thing that I love about here, what I'm seeing, is this mindset of going to the market. But most of the companies, most of the entrepreneurs, most of the people I know, they are not focused on perfecting what they have. They are focused on launching in the market. They're talking about, we have something, let's go learn in the market. And I can see a couple of reasons why that happens. One is first mover advantage. Again, we talked about that in the morning. In an emerging market, speed and agility are very, very, very important ways to mitigate risk. So that becomes very important. Another is that we actually are operating in a pretty opaque environment. We have very little data. A lot of the market is in totally uncharted territory. We have traditionally not had access to these markets. So how do you even know what works? So then at that point, we are forced to actually innovate by real-time prototyping. You put the stuff in the market, you iterate, you design more, and you go from there. And another interesting thing that it allows some brands to do is to associate themselves with experimentations, with boldness, with innovation. And Nano has done just that. It's a very good example of how the amazing engineering went in to make this affordable car. It had all the features, but it was still in beta. And now we as consumers are part of this experiment where we try it, and then the next version comes out, and the next version comes out, and we make it better together. Another experiment that is happening is in affordable housing. We know it is the need of the hour in our market here, in our society, and government is working on it, corporations are working on it, entrepreneurs are working on it, and the solutions that I see right now in the market at best are prototypes. But we'll all work together, and this is a space to watch. Another thing I have been reading in the papers is about that Akash tablet. Again, it's still work in progress. There's a lot to be done, but we'll all do it together. Another thing I have noticed here is the moment of truth. And how does one customize for that moment of truth? So we are a lot of people, and we are very diverse. That's an understatement. But we have different quirks, we have different needs. How do we make people feel unique? How do we tailor for those people in that scenario? And the more people we are, the more is our need to feel unique in that situation. And if I kind of go back to what I have seen in the past, what I have myself done in the past in my field, is actually to revert to technology. Pandora is a very good example, where the more music you listen on it, the more it customizes itself to you. But in India, what is really fascinating is what we are doing with people. If people are our biggest challenge, then they are our biggest assets also. There's some amazing examples of how we are using people for this last mile customization, for actually customizing the moment of truth. So I'm going back to this example of Jaipur Foot, where the moment of truth really happens when the person who is looking for the limb, his family, and the professional work together for the custom fitting process. And that is the happiest moment in that person's life and in that whole transaction that has happened. And a totally different example is Flipkart or Make My Trip. They actually started with online payment gateways, but very quickly realized that in Indian market, credit card doesn't have that kind of a hold. Also, people don't trust it. And that particular last mile of that transaction is very important. So to make sure that they are customizing for different kind of mindsets and people, they actually started delivering, they started offering cash on delivery. And again, that is on the backbones of our workforce, which is pretty cheap, and it can provide that kind of service. And it has proven to be a very good model for them. The last point I wanted to make was more about the spirit that runs our country. So it's really the spirit of, we really thrive on the spirits of the entrepreneurs of our country. So they are actually the primary agents of change. What I've noticed, and I'm comparing it, of course, to the Western world, you look at Japan, you look at Europe, you look at US, they're actually big governments, big corporations. Steve Jobs is there, Apple is there, Bill Gates is making these big kind of moves, and that is really the spirit of the nation. You know, that is what people aspire to. If you look at our country, we are actually looking at this collective of entrepreneurs that are making small changes, but they are actually making movements, big movements. They're solving big problems with these small changes. And in fact, they have almost become a precursor to looking at societal patterns. If you want to understand the aspirations of the society, a society like India, you need to see what people are doing at the entrepreneurial level. And of course, there are many, many examples. We have examples like PRS legislative, which is actually forcing the government to be more transparent and providing us an opportunity to participate in legislation. There are other examples like Nextdrop, kind of related to the last example, where they are trying to solve the problem of unpredictability of water when it is there in your taps or when it is not there, and the productivity lost in that. They're trying to solve it by two assets they have, people and cell phone network. And with that, they are trying to create human sensors for water management. And these examples just go on and on. There are many, many examples here. But the big point here is this is what drives us. And this is what is changing our corporations. They are disrupting them. This is what is making our government change. So if you look at all of these, I mean, they basically talk about an Indian style of innovation. Innovation, when we talk about globally, I mean, we talk a little bit too much about it, and it has been talked about as a primary driver of bringing value, making value happen, and actually bringing growth in business. But each region has their own way of doing it. If America's way of doing it is more rooted in its heritage of Silicon Valley, and Europe's is probably more about the perfection of the Scandinavian design, then what is our Indian way? And I think with our context being very different, our mindset being very different, our challenges being very different, and where we are looking, where we want to go is so different, that these are the rules we are setting for ourselves. These are the rules of engagement. Copying is very creative. Good enough works. And we should actually know when to stop, because this is what works in our environment. So for me, these are really some of the patterns that I am seeing that allow me to say, okay, this is the approach, Indian approach to innovation. What are some other patterns? Can we stop, or can I at least personally, not get all upset about the rough edges of the services, how things keep breaking, then there's a whole army of service people who kind of restore it, then it breaks the next week again. Like, why is this happening? What is the big, what are these big movements, and where is really our mind going to? So if we can actually accept who we are, what are our rules of engagement, and use these to innovate, then we have a long way to go. What cannot happen is we cannot actually not make change happen. We have to make change happen at any cost. Thank you.